Thank you. Thanks, Paloma. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Pamela Forward, President and Executive Director of Whistleblowing Canada Research Society. And I'm delighted to welcome all of you here this evening. I'm joining you from Ottawa and therefore would like to acknowledge that I'm on the traditional unceded territory of the Anishinaabe Algonquin people, First Nations of Canada. For those of you joining us for the first time, we're a nonprofit registered charity dedicated to advancing education on the whistleblowing phenomena through research and sharing that knowledge publicly. This is the second in the season series of webinars to that end. Now, I know you're all anxious to hear from our speaker, Dr. Richard Leblanc, a medical specialist, among other things, and to learn from his experiences and his knowledge that he's gained during an important part of his career in healthcare in the world of medicine and medical research. So without further ado, I'm going to turn over the proceedings to our moderator, Paloma Rago, who is Assistant Professor in the School of Public Policy and Administration at Carleton University here in Ottawa. And Paloma is also a founding director of Whistleblowing Canada. So Paloma, over to you and Richard. Can't hear you. Can't hear you, Paloma. Okay.
Sorry.
I'm going to say.
I'm really good about these things. Now it's my turn. So Whistleblowing Canada was founded in 2019. The organization's purpose is to advance education on whistleblowing by conducting research on the whistleblowing phenomenon and culture in Canada. So we're trying to capture knowledge, discovering new knowledge and sharing this information through webinars, conference, training, and training for the interested general public, as well as employees, whistleblowers, and leaders in Canadian public and private organization. So today I have the extreme privilege of hosting a talk entitled Academic Freedom and Academic Mobbing in a University Health Center in Quebec in Canada. Dr. Leblanc was born in Sorel-Tracy in Quebec on the estuary of the Richelieu River as it joins the majestic St. Lawrence River. Magtogoek, or the path that walks, as the Algonquin calls it. In the plain, earth, water, and sky meet. The ever-changing landscape was the prime mover of Richard's interest in the physical, mathematical, and natural sciences. In the 40-odd years since he set foot at the university, he earned degrees in physics, aerospace studies, mathematical physics, and medicine. His current interests center on the genomics and bioinformatics. Self-diagnosed with Asperger's syndromes, in his late 40s, he has devoted the last 20 years of his life to defending inclusion, academic freedom, and ethics while denouncing academic mobbing. So our speaker will talk for about 25 minutes. During this time, I will be muting everyone in case people join us during the talk. After the presentation, we will open the session for our conversation. We will ask that people raise their hands, and I will be calling on people to unmute themselves and ask the question live. As a note, should we be Zoom bombed, as these things happen sometimes, I will stop the seminar and invite everyone to log back in so I can throw out the troublemakers. So not all of us, because I guess we're all troublemakers in our own way, but one's in charge of that particular trouble. I will hand it off to Dr. Leblanc Thank you so much for coming and being with us today. Dr. Leblanc, I pass it on to you.
Thank you so much. First of all, this is a sort of a recycled talk that I gave to Canada Whistleblowing in the spring in May. I'm going to sort of rush through because this thing was prepared for, I would say, 45 minutes, and I have 25 minutes to go through the themes, so we can discuss right afterwards. So the themes of my presentation are right there in front of you. I hope the share screen is working. I'm going to talk about academic freedom in medical university centers. So it's very specific. We're talking about universities and medical centers in university in Canada. Of course, we're going to talk about scientific censorship, mobbing, susceptibility to mobbing, what is called collegiality, and more of a concern to me is what happened to the good doctors, as they say in TV, or artistic doctors. So there we go. As mentioned before, I have earned 3 university degrees. I'm a self-taught bioinformatician. I've been reviewer for scientific journal. This is very important. That means that I have enough, I would say, a university or knowledge, maturity to be able to review scientific journals that have been sort of submitted for publication. And I have published myself in all my fields of training, meaning physics, medical physics, bioinformatics, and medicine, etc. And even though I have 40 years of scholarships, I am not entitled to scientific dispute in academic medicine in Quebec. So again, it's not so much that scientific dispute has been denied to me. It happens in academic medicine centers in Quebec and of course in Canada, because we're part of a country. So we're going to see how the whole thing sort of played out in my life. So I'm mentioning to you that I am being denied right now rights to scientific dispute. I've been asking for 20 years now to have access to a scientific committee. Medicine being medicine in Canada, when I'm not entitled to access to such a committee where I could debate, in a proper way, in a scientific way. Now I'm going to talk about being a doctor and what I would say wrongs that arise in that environment. So I was denied rights to obtain proper consent from my patient. This is sort of a grave ethical mistake. I was denied rights to rectify erroneous diagnosis. Again, we're talking about medicine in Quebec and Canada. It's unbelievable that I cannot sort of argue to the fact that patient received bad diagnosis, never been properly treated, and the argument was that the less the patient would know, the better it would be. I sort of refuse myself to subtreat patients according to pharma-sponsored trial protocols in various centers in Montreal and where I am right now in Sherbrooke. And against my repeated objection, I was forced to spin scientific nonsense. Spin, as I mentioned to you, is something that is prevalent in medicine. We'll go back to it. It's what I'm going to stress a little bit is something happened to me, but you have to be very careful about whistleblower, because people will have a tendency to talk about, oh, I was wrong, something like bad happened to me. I'd like to sort of overview instead of digging into my own case. The only thing I'm going to insist on is the fact that I refused 20 years ago to write down that cancer cells could be transplanted into a patient. It didn't make sense. It doesn't make sense to argue such an argument. Again, I was forced to write that cancer cells would be transplantable. So of course, paper was submitted and refused for publication. So I just decided not to work anymore on one given manuscript 20 years ago, and I lost my whole career and my whole reputation on my refusal to sort of write scientific nonsense. What's proper to medicine, and it's sort of a bit of a cancer actually, going through the literature, is that there's a tendency to overemphasize some results. It's called spin. And it happened into some of the publication I was sort of again forced to work on. Always refused for publications. What is spin? Spin is the misleading reporting of results to make them appear more favorable. Spin is widespread in medicine. There's so much involved into medicine, monies, reputation, egos, that everyone will try to spin their own results. So spin is encouraged by a competitive research environment. Greater importance are given to positive results. Sometimes negative results are just as pertinent. There's a lot of guidelines aimed at discouraging the practice, and very often what happens is there's a selective reporting of outcome. I was sort of involved in such a spin sort of undertaking when I was mentored in Montreal. I just couldn't believe to the extent to which my mentor or mentors would go to try to spin their results. I'm an Asperger, among other things. I'm very factual, I'm very rigorous, and whenever I try to publish myself, I go the other way around. So I have examples of comments on some of my attempts to be published. This is a very relevant letter to the daily editor. The letter is well written, makes a lucid arguments about some things. Letter left unpublished because it reports non-positive results, which again, in the spin sort of mentality of these days, reporting non-positive results is not welcome. So I got to be unpublished, but I kept the comments. Letter stress some significant underestimation of mortality rate. That's more pertinent to my talk. I was saying, the guy is announcing 10% mortality rate in allografting setting. I was sort of announcing a 20%, meaning double. So the whole thing was spun to decrease by 1/2 the mortality rate of a cohort of patient. So what I've been trying to do across the years is to have access to data to reinterpret the results, because the whole thing was like deduced from publication. In Quebec, in particular, it's very, very difficult to have access to medical data. Actually, it's almost impossible. As journalists, they will tell you it takes up to 10 years for them to attain some of the results or data that is out there concerning our health system. So what was important for the mobbing process is my self-rehabilitation through collegial and scholarly dispute is being denied. So again, I'm just asking, can I have a scientific discussion with some of the people that damaged my career? And there's no way. 20 years worth of effort, I can tell you, it doesn't work. As I mentioned to you, I'd like to overview instead of digging into my own story. One institution that is very important to my talk is what is called the Canadian Association of University Teachers. They were involved in 2 reports. The first one was the case of Dr. Olivieri, which unfortunately is not with us today. Dr. Olivier works in Toronto. She was involved in a really nasty sort of academic fight with pharma involved and bribery and so on. The conclusion of the first report of CAUT was that academic freedom should be a foundational principle of academic medicine. If there's a big cross in the screen right now, it's just because all those recommendations sort of put forward in 2004 were not sort of actualized in the medical centers in Canada. They mentioned that reference to and protection of academic freedom must be included in university hospital affiliation. That was a major proposal and was not actually actualized. And there's been a lot of talk in the last 2 years about academic freedom in Canada university. So you can see CAUT was smack right there on the problem. Again, a recommendation was universities and healthcare institutions must ensure that clinical faculty, meaning a person like me, have access to dispute resolution procedures. Well, it's not there. Natural justice is not there. Procedural fairness is not there. Clinical faculty should have access to independent external arbitration. As I mentioned to you, I asked for this for 20 years, didn't happen. Clinical faculty should create effective representation organization. It does not happen. our federation or our unions are not there to defend us or academic freedom. They're there to defend our wallet and our money is nothing else. The second CAT report that was very important to me was the one that involved Dr. Orn. Dr. Orn is a cardiologist working in Halifax. They came and they did a second sort of inquiry about what happened in this specific case to Dr. Horn, like they did for Dr. Olivier. I find their second report very interesting because they conclude a few things. As they say, if you want to be promoted in medicine, well, you have to be collegial. And then they say, well, what is this thing called collegiality? So apparently it's perceived as being something that is very important to have, and share collegiality considered essential for effective functioning on the department. If you do lack such a thing, well, you're being perceived as a threat. But then CARET was very clever. They say, what is meant by collegiality? And they say it's very, very vague. They say that it appears to be more a measure of congeniality. Okay, so we're very far from being in between colleagues. What they're asking me to do is to be someone I'm not. So they say vagueness about those definitions that allows the department chief to decide if you're going to be promoted or not. As for myself, I cannot go to a cafeteria. It's way too noisy. You know, I'm an Asperger, I'm a sensitive to noise. So actually, I've been denied my own job in Montreal because apparently I would not come with my colleagues to cafeterias, and I would argue, listen, I can't. It's deafening to me. They never sort of, use the excuse actually. So as you can see, it's more, the whole thing is related more to perception of who you are than are you competent or not. Dr. Horn, in an article or an essay she wrote for the Globe and Mail, said, doctors face an uphill battle when fighting against harassment and bullying. Okay. And as for myself, what I discovered is that the Quebec health law states very explicitly that doctors in Quebec do not have to abide with the labor code nor its provision against bullying. So it's like fighting the windmills, you know. Law is not there to protect us. If I go in front of a judge, the judge will say, well, I'd like to apply some law and help you, Richard. The fact though is doctors agree that the labor code is not applying to you. So good luck, you're being bullied, good luck. You know, there's nothing that can protect you legally speaking. So we talked about research a little bit before. This is the stand of my own college des Médecins du Québec. They wrote something about the clinical research and medicine in 2021. That's, well, it's last year actually. It's very ambivalent what they say about clinical research. They say, well, these are extracts from that document. They say, when deviant behaviors are observed in research, arise the very delicate issue of denunciation. Well, instead of taking a strong stand, my college said, well, it's very delicate. You know, you have to be careful. Are you going to whistleblow or not in medical research? They say, if exemplary research is a virtue to which all researchers should adhere, well, it's more complex to apply in practice. Again, am I being helped by my college when they take that stand? Well, I'll tell you, no, I'm not. When a researcher notices a situation likely to be denounced, whistleblowing, it will probably be inhibited by contradictory feelings. Well, it depends who you are. If you're not Asperger, neurotypical, you might have those things: desire not to harm colleagues, not to make waves, fear of reprisal, fear that might damage your reputation. Well, I can tell you one thing: if you're an Asperger, you don't give a damn about this, and what happened to you is you're going to feel the damage because you're going to whistleblow. So the college says the researcher could then be tempted to remain silent, which I did not, to wait and then even hope that denunciation is made by someone else. It's very interesting, that concept of someone will do it. I think it's called responsibility diffusion, you know. Well, someone will do it, it's not going to be me. But then my college say maintaining public trust and setting an example in research requires courage. Well, I guess I'm courageous. I don't know. So this is what they say about whistleblowing. That's my college speaking. Physicians should act to preserve research excellence and public confidence. Well, in view of what I just read to you, well, this is a very wishy-washy. They say, well, you'll be scared, don't dare to do it, but you should be, you should respect research excellence. Whistleblowing protection mechanism are offered by the college. Well, again, you see there's a big X there. It's not true. They say that they would protect the whistleblower. They won't. Among other things, just read this here. It is prohibited to threaten or take reprisal against a person that has alerted a syndic. Syndic is the college, bureau of inquiry. What happened is I reported something to the syndic. Well, that person threatened and took reprisal against me. So what's very interesting too is the college. As I mentioned to you, my mentors were spinning their results. Well, they gave prizes. They gave scientific prizes. College should not be there to give scientific prizes to doctors. They should make sure that the research is proper. So, well, they gave excellence prize to some of my mentors. So the fight is lost way before I begin the war. So I'm a victim of mobbing. What is mobbing? Mobbing is social murder. People cannot survive their own murder. Mobbing is an passionate collective campaign to exclude, punish, humiliate, target, indicated by a person in position, a mentor. Mobbing is the desperate urge to crush and eliminate the target. The urge travels through the workplace like a virus. Well, if you think that COVID is contagious, you should see what mobbing is. It's amazing how fast this thing goes through a system. You know, you go to a place, they don't know you. Well, they know you, actually. They heard of you. So there's another, this was F. Seguin, she published on mobbing in Quebec. Kenneth Westus is an international authority on mobbing. He says that there's a larger and larger range of hostile ploys comes to be seen as legitimate. So this is experience on the ground. People, they don't even realize that they're mobbing you. It seems to be so much part of the machine that you're going to be mobbed. Your younger colleague will mob you, and nobody seems to be realizing that you're suffering like hell. So academic mobbing is unethical. It's inhuman. To be cast out as an academic is not only to lose your identity. I can tell you this, it's true, but also you lose your own entire way of life, your sense of accomplishment, your ability to provide for you and your family. This is very close to what I feel like right now. You know, I wouldn't even talk to you about the last week I lived through. There's a high suicide rate among mob professors and doctors. Well, this become a problem. I'll tell you why. It's just because if you approach, say, a psychiatrist and you say, I'm being mobbed, I'd like to go on, on a leave, they won't give you the leave. You have to be sick with something. If you're mobbed, you're not sick. Mobbing is not part of the psychiatric dialogue or, vocabulary. So if you'd like a psychiatrist to declare you victim of mobbing, well, a psychiatrist won't do it. It's not a medical issue. It's a systemic issue. And then you're sort of left on your own because there's not much in the system to help mob people. So mobbing is in 4 phases. It goes from bullying to psychoterror to denials of target's right and exclusion from the labor market. I lived through that. I didn't have access to my job for almost 4 years, a few years ago. And see here, authoritative decision of psychiatric internment. In my case, I was not interned. What happened is they declared me actually a criminal. I had to sort of dig my victims out of somewhere. I had to divulge the name of my victims, and I had to fight for 4 years to reintegrate my own job. This was really, really painful, actually. It happened between 2012 and 2015. So between 2012 and 15, I'm forbidden to access my job and my salary. I'm submitted to 5 psychiatric evaluations. 4 of them actually were saying that I was fully up to work as a skilled physician and as a university professor, but the only one paid by my institution was stating that I was a serial killer, therefore I couldn't work. So it took me 3.5 years to come back. and I sort of complained to the syndic du collège about the whole thing. They reprimanded the psychiatrist that published the bad evaluation on my case, but the guy sent me a formal notice, and this was in full infraction of the law. I won the college, and college didn't get to me. So my own college should have punished the psychiatrist, and actually I was left on my own again. So I'm a physicist who became a physician. You know, I said to people, I'm French speaking, don't know the difference between physicist and physician, so I just became both. Then I became a bioinformatician, and then I sort of was defiant. I'm being published actually. I went to 3 international conferences this year only, and I'm being forbidden actually in Quebec to carry that type of research. So I do it on my own in my spare time. So if you're being mobbed, it's most probably because there's something about you that will make you a targeted victim. So many targets of mobbing deviates from the norm of the dominant group. It's very important you deviate from the norm. Targets of mobbing present often characteristics that distinguish them from the in-group. By defying the norms, you become a target, and you maybe this is the thing that really sort of puzzled me, because I've been told many times across the year that I'm threatening. I just don't understand how come I'd be threatening to other members, because they're the one killing my job, my reputation, everything else. And apparently I keep being threatening to them, and that's why I'm being mobbed. It just doesn't make sense. So as I mentioned to you, what distinguished me from the in-group was the fact that, among other things, I was an Asperger. I was a self-diagnosis. It was missed by, I consulted about, I would say, 5 to 10 people. I was suffering, was miserable. And then it turned out that I was cued in on the Asperger thing by reading a book about Dirac, a physicist, actually. So Asperger syndrome comes from Hans Asperger, who was a psychiatrist who took care of young patient in Germany during the war. He mentioned something like, he says, it seems that for success in science and art, a dash of autism is essential. If you want to sort of go away from the mainstream, you have to be able to think of your own. So Asperger was thinking that, well, you need a bit of a dash of autism. So actually, I'm not a very severe, autistic person. I'm just having a dash of it. So there we go. So there was a very interesting editorial in a British journal recently about autistic doctors in primary care. Well, I'm in secondary care, but these things, they do apply. Difficulties faced by autistic doctors, in our experience, rarely relate to patient care. Patient contact is usually task-focused and structured around a very well-defined role. Trouble arises not with the patient, but it arises with the unstructured, unpredictable, confusing interaction with colleagues. Well, I just don't understand this. Why is it unstructured and unpredictable? My colleagues, they're scientific like me. They have learned medicine. This is a scientific sort of, field of expertise. But the point, though, is whenever you talk with colleagues, it's very unstructured. There's a hierarchy at play here. So there's a lot of social conventions and nuances of neurotypicals that I don't see. It's very opaque, very illogical to me. It's very bewildering. And then what happened is then my relationship with my hierarchy is fraught with misunderstanding. I mean, this is spot on. Issues are understandable, though, if you view them through my own autistic lenses. I'm a very factual person. I'm very well sort of geared toward structuring my interaction with my patient, finding their diagnosis, blah, blah, blah. It doesn't work with my neurotypical colleagues. So there was one major inquiry in Canada about the Canada Post employee who went in front of the Canada human rights. And when there was an inquiry, the one doctor, Dr. Motro, who came and testified, and he said many things very interesting. He said autistic individuals have no problem with the hierarchy if it's fair and coherent. Autistic individuals have problem when the hierarchy is contradictory. Autistic individuals are not rigid as one can think. I can tell you I'm very flexible. They can adapt to new situations as long as the rules are clear and there's a coherent framework. When there's no rules, well, then you don't perform well. And we do function better in a regulated environment. And the point, though, is medicine should be such a thing. If there's one place where you would need structure, it's in medicine. It shouldn't be the free-for-all it is right now, and it's a very free-for-all. So Michelle Dawson, the employee Canada Post, won a case, and now she's an expert, actually, researcher working for Dr. Motron, and she publishes a lot. She's been given, actually, an honorary degree by University of Montreal a couple of years ago. There's a web page on her. See Wikipedia. Very interesting. So what happened to autistic person when they're under stress? Well, they have a meltdown, probably the longest meltdown in history, 20 years worth of meltdown. And again, as I mentioned to you before, if everything would be seen through proper ethical and deontological lenses, there wouldn't be any problem. So there we go. We covered the whole thing: academic freedom in Medical University Center, scientific censorship, which sort of degraded into mobbing. Why am I susceptible to mobbing? What is collegiality? And there I am. So I'm just begging people to say, let's stop the bullying. I've made some progress in my case, and I have very hard warned. Last year, both my hospital and the university agreed to something called a dispute prevention and resolution process. The whole thing actually is simple. Instead of having a battle of lawyers, my lawyers against the lawyers, what happened is both sides, they say, well, let's go and take a third party. And the third party will sort of listen to both sides and arbitrate. If there's such a process, it means that at least one of the two parties is working in bad faith. In my case, I'm working in good faith. So my hospital is not working in good faith, but they nevertheless agreed to go for a dispute prevention and resolution. There's one person that is there that is doing, the how can I say, trying to resolve my difference with my hospital. That person made an inquiry and suggested to my hospital about 3 months ago, after a full 1 year of inquiry, he says there's two things that need to be done. Richard should be considered as being a victim of mobbing, and there should be an inquiry about the toxic environment into which Richard is evolving. We're still waiting for the hospital and the university to come back to this, but my suspicion is we're going to go ahead. So we're going to have an independent person who will come and say, what is the definition of mobbing? Is Richard responding to the definition of mobbing? Yes, and then what can be done? So as you can see, it's a long all things. It's worth 20 years of effort. The nice thing about the DPR, the dispute prevention and resolution process, is that instead of being, again, carried out by lawyers, and then it's like nobody's listening to nobody. This process at least allow a very independent person to speak out for, well, the victims, and it seems to be working. We're going toward those, inquiries and mobbing, validation and so on, and then we'll proceed. My last sort of axis of effort is to try to change the law. I've been talking to older minister from Liberal government in the past. He found my idea very interesting of not rewriting the whole Quebec health law, but just go straight to one article of it and try to change the thing from, in Quebec, the doctors do not have to abide to the Labour Code, to try to change it to doctors in Quebec would have to abide with the Labour Code. This is in the boom time very small change to the law, but a major one, because I mentioned to you, if a judge has access to a law like this, then he can apply it. So that would be useful, because right now, even if I go to court, I'm bound to lose because there's no legislation. So I'm exploring the legislative avenue. Again, it's a very long haul, very difficult, and so on and so on. So there we go. I covered the ground, and I'm not anymore in charge.
Thank you, Dr. Laurent. It was really informative and very troubling. I would like to open the floor for a question. Dr. Leblanc, did you mind stop sharing your screen so then we'll all appear on the perfect. And so I invite, if you have any questions, please raise your hand so I can see the feature. Yeah, you're more than welcome to start. I can start us off with a question. You know, as a fellow academic, I'm was very troubled by your story. I'm interested in initially in your talk. You were talking about having access to a committee to discuss. How do you envision? At least I know in my discipline that does not exist. So I don't know if in medicine it's different. But how do you, in an ideal world, in an ideal academic setting, how would you see that process of discussing with your peers your position and finding some resolution that perhaps would involve not agreeing with you at the same time?
Well, as I mentioned to you, the overview allows us to go, and instead of trying to find a solution by yourself or, you know, creating one, is an organism like CAUT, as I mentioned to you, the Canadian Association of University Teachers. In their report in the Olivier cases, they have a one-page worth of, they suggested, and actually what they suggested is just provide doctors with a way of disputing, you know, without having to have their career destroyed. So my recommendation would be just go back to the CAT report and implement it. They were very sort of specific about the fact that our unions are not unions. There was a ruling in Canada a couple of years ago out west where a doctor was asking, I think it was the Alberta Medical Association, AMA, to come and help him, and they refused. So a judge came and said, I'm sorry, but AMA, the Alberta Medical Association, you are a union. You are under obligation to come and help that person. Well, it sort of gives you the extent of the problematic that we face. Our federation, because it's called Federation Quebec, they're not behaving like unions. They should. So that's a second avenue. We should implement those union sort of rules and laws. So there's the CAD suggestion in one case, and then our union should be like more like unions by now.
Thank you. Any other questions? Reactions?
Paloma, Richard, Pamela, I would like to, it's Lisa Wildman, I'm with Norms the Garlic. I would like to say that even being familiar with Richard's story, having it presented again tonight and recognizing all of those structures that are in place that are supposed to assist and are ineffectual, that it is very disappointing, especially when we think of the level of education, and you would think that would represent also a level of common sense and commonality. And that is obviously not what Richard has experienced. I remember talking to Richard at another meeting about the fact that some of the